Hey folks, this is an overview video of the world-class Rotary Youth Exchange Program's pillars created by Kirk Langford and Pauline Perot. My name is Kirk Langford, and this is Pauline Perot. For those of you who don't know us, both of us are past Rotary Youth Exchange students. We are rebounds or Rotex. Pauline went to Germany in the late 1990s, and Kirk here went to Brazil in the mid 2000s, 2005, 2006. And we talk a lot about youth exchange. We were both heavily involved in Rotex when we got back from our exchanges and got involved in our district committees and beyond that. And we've spent a lot of time talking about youth exchange, and it led us to having a really great conversation about how we can really make the program that much better. And so we want to walk you through what came out of those initial conversations, and that's turned into this entire sort of pillars philosophy that we've come up with, and maybe that some of you have seen at NAYEN or attended some of the workshops that we've done.
So we had a really big question. Is our program world class? I know many of us would want to say yes to that, but when we took a closer look, we thought about what is it that we're really promoting here? We see districts talking about language and friends and travel and new culture. Who's really our best fit? Is it just because you have someone involved in Rotary, you should go? It would benefit you personally? Would it really benefit Rotary? Does that matter? How are we even preparing them? Are we just talking about the rules? Whatever you do, just don't get sent home. We'll do a little culture shock. We'll talk a little bit about the language. We might even play Bafa Bafa. What exactly are we offering? Is it the best year of somebody's life? And how do we measure success? Because the only qualifier we found was early returns. What we realized here is, are we really moving in the same direction? A lot of it feels like this image, right? We're being pulled back and forth, back and forth.
So that got us to thinking about what does a world-class Rotary Youth Exchange program look like? And the world-class part came from, we were developing this for the NAYEN conference that was in Vancouver, and Vancouver is consistently rated among some of the most world-class cities out there. And so we thought, well, how does that apply to youth exchange? And what does a world-class Rotary Youth Exchange program look like? And through our discussions and through trying to answer some of those stumbling blocks that we just mentioned, we came up with the 5 pillars. And so we talk about marketing, candidates, orientations, experiences for our inbounds, and impact. So Pauline, can you walk us through what we're talking about when it comes to marketing?
Sure. When we had a look at the marketing that we saw worldwide, we can see that we were all over the map. We talked about life-changing experiences, live another life as a true local, not observe, you're not just an outsider, see the world from the inside out. I'm not even really sure what that means. A journey of a lifetime. I mean, these are all really okay slogans, but is that really what we're offering? And I think there's a bigger picture at play. When we found this one, we knew this was as close to the bullseye that we could possibly be. We're a program that builds peace. If you ask anyone why we do Rotary Youth Exchange, most of us would answer it's to build goodwill, and ultimately that goodwill will lead to world peace. Why don't we talk about that in our marketing? Why are we so scared to use those words and talk about ambassadors, lifelong leadership skills, new language and culture, friendship, and a global citizen? This, by the way, comes to us straight from the RYE website. So what might we want to put a little more of in our marketing? Let's dig out some ambassadorial photos. This already becomes a sorting process that Kirk's going to share in a moment of who's our best candidate. But you see here, there are students who are actually sharing a bit about their country. And let's tighten up our language. I would really encourage you to get the word ambassador into your marketing, as well as finding the images that go along and create this idea of world peace. So how do we find our candidates?
Yeah. So the second pillar is, of course, candidates. So Pauline got us off to a good start thinking about marketing. And are we really marketing to the people that we want in this program? And if we're marketing to the right people, we're going to get better candidates. And so I want to introduce you to 2 different candidates that we tend to see. And the first one is what I would call candidatus communis. Now, maybe you didn't know, but I'm a part-time anthropologist in my spare time. And I coined this phrase here among my travels and documentation of exchange student species. And so candidatus communis, or the all too common candidate, is what we tend to see a lot of. And although you're watching this as a video, I'm sure if I asked you to raise your hand if you've ever had a candidate that, doesn't really spark much enthusiasm or excitement, but is just kind of there, you'd all be able to raise your hand. Well, that's the all too common candidate. Often it's a situation where they've been sent on exchange rather than wanting to truly go on exchange. It's situations where maybe their siblings went on exchange, so now it's their turn, or maybe their mom or dad is the president of the Rotary Club, or their grandpa or grandma is involved, so now it's their right to get to go on exchange. And generally, what we notice with these students is they're not particularly excited about going on exchange themselves. It's not necessarily their idea. They're not hyped about traveling or really seeing much of the world. Maybe they're not enticed about learning a new language. And so what we know is that exchange is incredibly difficult. And so if we're sending students that really aren't super excited about this opportunity, it's going to be a struggle for them. And the other thing we know is that sending a candidatus communis is also going to be a struggle for the host club, the host families, and the host school, because nobody wants to have a student living in their home or hosted by their club who doesn't want to be there. And so we juxtapose the candidatus communis with candidatus exemplarus, the exemplary candidate. This is the candidate that maybe their parents have nothing to do with Rotary. Maybe they're not Rotarians, right? Maybe they've hardly ever even heard of Rotary, but the student took it upon themselves to do some research about Rotary, wanted to go on exchange and found the Rotary Youth Exchange program, had to convince their parents that this was a legitimate program and this was a great idea and that they should be allowed to go away for a whole year. This is the type of candidate that we want, the type of candidate that is taking initiative, that has some drive and some ambition, and it's really their idea to want to go on exchange. Now, we got to be careful and we want to make sure we clarify that we're not saying that a student who isn't top of their class and best of the best and absolutely amazing, we're not saying you have to be all of that in order to make a great exchange student, in order to be a candidatus exemplarus. But I think what we want to see is that shimmering of ambition, of resilience, of adaptability, of excitement about this program rather than indifference or I guess I'm going because I don't really have a choice. So that's what we're looking for when we think of what kind of candidates do we want to have? What kind of candidates do we want to see? We want to aim for those candidatus exemplarus, the ones that sort of blow us away, or we see a really strong potential in them to become an incredible exchange student and have an incredible year. So we want to have a proactive approach because as we can see from Mr. Bean here, hey, the selection process can be a frustrating one, right? And we got to pick right. And so if you have a proactive approach, that can be in your candidate selection, that can be through your interviews. There's lots of different times and points in an outbound candidate's journey where we can be saying, wait, let's step back for a minute and assess whether or not this is the right candidate. I think in a lot of cases, we also pick up candidatus communis and we send them simply because we want to be involved in the youth exchange program. And so we pick a student that is less than ideal simply so that our club can be involved in the program. But we want to make sure that we're not doing that. And we also want to make sure that we are taking as many opportunities to vet the candidates as possible. And in fact, what that often means is just because a student's been approved by the district and their application has been sent off, it does not mean that there's sort of no way that they won't go. Right? We want to make sure that they know that, yes, they've been sort of conditionally approved based on their application and based on their preliminary interview, but that we will be measuring and observing them throughout their entire time as they prepare to go on exchange. Because as Rotarians, as people working in this youth exchange program, we know that it can be extremely frustrating to deal with a student that's less than stellar. And it can lead to burnout, and really it can lead to host families and host clubs pulling out of the program, withdrawing from the program. And so we have to be so careful that we are not sending students that, if we want to put it one way, students that we wouldn't want to host ourselves or that we wouldn't be excited about hosting ourselves. Not just students we would put up with, but students we would be excited to host in our club or in our own homes. And really the reality, if we want to have a bit of a harsh reality, is that the youth exchange program numbers in general have been declining in lots of different places. Now, I'm not saying that's happening everywhere in the world, but in lots of places around the world, the numbers have been declining. And so when we think of this idea of just not sending certain students if we just don't think that they are up to the task, that can seem really harsh, right? Because we're used to kind of taking whoever we can get so that we can participate in the program with the hope that Yeah, they're not an ideal candidate, but you know what? I'm sure they'll grow into it. I'm sure they'll be okay, right? We've all had those students that weren't okay. We weren't too sure whether we should send them. And then they came back and, everything worked out. It's great. But let me ask you this. We've all received a student where we went, oh my gosh, why did somebody send me this kid? Not that they're a bad human being, but they're not a great exchange student. And we struggle with that student for the whole year. And we keep asking ourselves, why were they sent on exchange? Why are we willing to take that risk? Why are we willing to send a student that we know is less than ideal simply on the hope that things are going to turn out for the best and everything's going to be okay? And the reality is that, like I said, our numbers are dropping off a little bit. And so we're sort of bleeding out slowly. We're dying a slow death. So why not notice that we have a problem, address that problem and say, you know what, let's radically change how we do things so that, yes, maybe we're going to cut our numbers in half because we're committing to only sending candidatus exemplarus. But in doing so, we are going to ensure a stronger reputation of the club moving forward and of the program moving forward. And that's going to help us, yes, cut numbers, maybe initially do a little bit of pruning, as it were, but with the hopes that the new growth will be stronger than what was there before. And so with that, we move into our orientations pillar, and I will let Pauline take it from here.
So once we choose the exemplary candidates, we have to give them an orientation that meets that level. How many of you have seen something like this? There's a slide, it has 1,000 pieces of information, a big paragraph. The presenter gets up and starts reading it word for word. It's boring, it's dull. We probably don't want to listen to it as adults, never mind what the students are doing. So what should we be focusing on instead? Well, this is probably not one of those things. We see a huge focus worldwide on the Ds. And in fact, when we talk to students that come to at least our programs for Kirk and I in Canada, what they remember from their orientations is the 4 Ds. There's not much beyond that of what they're able to tell us of what they recall, other than I was told I shouldn't drink, I shouldn't drive, I shouldn't date, and I shouldn't do drugs, which are important. We're not arguing it. We know those are really key for their safety. However, it leaves a big blank of if we tell teenagers what not to do, we haven't actually told them what to do. And so the opportunity here is really to think about this in a different context. If you're familiar with the 6 Bs, we really talk about that like a soccer pitch, where the rules form the boundary. No drinking, no driving, no drugs, and no dating are the boundaries. And if you step outside the boundary, just like the game of soccer or football, it's over. And so that might mean the student gets returned home. They really understand that, but telling them how to play the game of soccer and not giving them any kind of context is really where we fall down. And where we see districts adding more Ds and more rules, you and I know what that means. It means students find more ways to break them and hide it from Rotarians, which sets up a pretty losing game that's frustrating for both of us. So what do we want to switch to? Looking at your orientation, we want to avoid anything that looks like the left-hand side. If it looks like school and it smells like school, it's probably going to be received like school. Versus the right-hand side, here's an inbound orientation. The student's language is usually minimal when they arrive in their host country. So we did a photo scavenger hunt. We chose activities that would show off the host country, a chance to meet their YEO or counselor, have some fun. It was completely team building events, activities, and the whole idea was social, where we didn't rely on reading them all of the rules and going through things. It was engaging. And that's really what our young people deserve of us. And once we get them orientated, we need to be thinking about what experiences should we be offering them.
Awesome. Thanks, Pauline. That's exactly right. Is that provide, we want to have great candidates. We want to provide a great orientation. And then what we tend to see a lot of times with our inbounds. So now we're talking about our inbounds coming to us from another country, and they've been trained on this very thorough orientation. And these kids are the best of the best. They're resilient. They want to be ambassadors, and they show up, and we want to show them all the touristy stuff. Go stand by Niagara Falls and take a picture with your flag. Yay, Brazil. Yay, whatever. And I think what we're missing there is that these are complex teenagers with complex thoughts, and they are, these robust human beings that have ideas and want to discuss things. And so we're doing them a disservice by only providing them with what I would consider a surface level tourist experience. we need to go deeper than that. And so what we see when we look online is a lot of this, everyone posing together with their flag in a very touristy location. And again, not that those things are bad. We're not saying don't go to Niagara Falls, but how can we go a little bit deeper? How can we do even a little bit better, right? And what else do we see when it comes to the experiences that our students have, right? We know that, let's talk about it, forced host families. When a club or a district says, if you want to participate in the youth exchange program, you have to host a child as well. That's not always appropriate, and it goes against Rotary International's rules. We have seen lots of these sentences. These are quotes rather than us just making them up, right? We only hosted because my son wanted to go on exchange. You're only here because my daughter is on exchange this year. I heard that exact thing in my host family. My host family happened to be very loving, but that didn't feel good to hear that as a teenager, right? And so we need to get away from providing host families that are less than ideal because we have these incredible kids here, right? And imagine being accepted by the Rotary Youth Exchange Program only to be rejected by your host family for things that are out of your control because they just don't really want to host and it wasn't in their control to say no because they were told they had to. That's a huge disservice to these young people that we are sending around the world and asking to be the best ambassadors they can be. So what can we do that's even better? What can this look like instead? Well, here's an example. Take your students to Niagara Falls, right? Take a picture with them at the falls with their flags. That's kind of that surface level. That's what we do. And you can see Vince McMahon there. He's like, nah, that's okay. Yeah, that's all right. But I think we can do even better. So let's do even better. What does that look like to do good, better, best, and mind blowing at the end? So the better version is while you're at Niagara Falls, whether it's while you're at lunch or whether you're driving to Niagara Falls or driving home from Niagara Falls, ask about different landmarks in each student's country. Hey, we have Niagara Falls. What do you have in Taiwan? What do you have in France? Okay. And then what does the great version look like? The good, better, best version. The best version might be ask why certain landmarks in each student's country are famous. What do the landmarks tell us about that country, about that culture, or about the history? Right? Really dig into associating Niagara Falls and how we see it as a cultural icon, right? In the same way that they see their cultural icons. And then what could mind-blowing look like? Well, let's also talk about renewable and non-renewable resources and energy resources in each student's country. Niagara Falls provides a whole bunch of hydroelectric power to Canada and the US. Let's talk about that. Let's have a great conversation. And in doing so, we're not saying that you Rotarians or any Rotarian involved in this has to have all the answers to these sorts of questions. I don't know how much hydroelectric power Ontario or Canada generates, but it's great to have that conversation together and to learn together with our exchange students. And in a weird way, our inbounds are teaching us about our own country when we ask questions like this. What a meaningful ambassadorial experience. And think about how different that mind-blowing level is over here compared to go to Niagara Falls, take the touristy pictures, buy the souvenir. So we can do so much better in really bringing the ambassadorial aspect to all of these inbound experiences that we do. And so
And
when
why does
that, yeah, go ahead, Pauline. Go ahead. Yeah.
Why does all of this matter? We've got to do a better job of understanding our impact. And when we had a really close look at this, the only thing that Kirk and I could find that we measured globally was early returns. And early returns isn't exactly a measure of success. We know many students make it to the finish line, but that doesn't tell us about whether they burnt out host families, clubs, their schools, etc. So we have to look a little differently. And what does success look like in this program? What does success look like to the student? What does it look like to the clubs and your districts? And what about to Rotary International, our communities, and the world, this whole idea of world peace? Both of us work in adult education, and clients pay us really to have impact. They want to make sure that they are seeing results for their investment and not just entertaining their staff and putting on a smile sheet. We really enjoyed the session. And we don't want our youth exchange students putting a smile on the sheet saying, hey, that was a great year, best year of my life. And we have no way of really quantifying that. If you remember, Rotary a few years ago asked us to stop measuring attendance and start counting service hours. Why? Because we really wanted to tell a different story about impact, not whether someone paid for lunch or dinner or breakfast, but how many hours are they pouring into the community? And so here's the simple metrics where we start to see at the start of the exchange, there's some things that we could probably start to measure. Students get to self-rate perhaps, and then at the end, we reflect. What are some of the things they should be thinking about? Very preliminary. Here's a list that Kirk and I had come up with. How many talks did they give on their home country? How many service hours did they donate to the community? How many Rotary clubs do we have meaningfully engaged? Doesn't mean they all have to host, but what is meaningful look like? And the list goes on. There's a lot of different things that you and I can start to look at, and this process is underway. We have districts around the world right now who have taken on our challenge to try a few of these things for the end of this exchange year and starting in August with the new students. How can we start to put some measurements in place where you and I can get some impact? And what could we do with that impact? Notice that model is a circle. It feeds right back in. So we're able to go back and market a completely different story, which helps us attract different candidates, which are on brand with our desire to create world peace, which helps us create orientations worthy of ambassadors, which makes us up-level our experiences and add value beyond the typical tourist experiences. And around we go. It all comes down to impact. And what Kirk and I know is what got us here won't get us there. We have a really good program, but we also have an opportunity to be really great.
That's right. And we also, working in leadership and adult education, we talk a lot about if you keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting. So if you want to change your results, you have to change your behaviors. You have to change what you do and how you do it. And so this is your chance. And I think we just want to end with this great quote from Rotary International President Holger Knack, who said, "We will not let rapid change defeat us. We will capture this moment to grow Rotary, making it stronger, more adaptable, and even more aligned with our core values." Now, he was talking about COVID during this time and how Rotary can adapt to COVID, but we think that this is equally as valid and relatable to what we're experiencing in Rotary Youth Exchange now and how we can together create a world-class Rotary Youth Exchange program.
Awesome. Thanks so much for listening.
All right. Okay, I'm going to stop recording.